Good evening, guys. Good afternoon. Welcome to the blockchain session. And as the first speaker in this session, my task is to set the stage and introduce you to blockchain. In this session, I'm going to tell you IBM's perspective on blockchain and how this emerging technology is going to revolutionize business. So when you think about blockchain, well, let me get into first how to use this. Okay. What am I going to cover? So I'm going to cover, tell you what blockchain is all about, and then why blockchain is relevant for business. Third is share some examples of where blockchain has been implemented successfully, and of course, last, how IBM can help. So let's start with blockchain. So what is blockchain? So when you think about a business network, when you think about businesses or organizations, they do not operate in isolation. They always operate with other business, and they operate with banks. They operate with insurance companies, other governments, or suppliers and providers. And in so doing, they always create wealth. They create wealth and create assets. And by doing this, we have a network where you have suppliers, you have providers, and wealth is being created. Now, when businesses operate, they operate in a market. And there are two types of markets. One, open or public markets, such as an auction, and two, private markets, such as a private equity market or bond exchange. Now, what is key with blockchain is it is fundamental that businesses operate within a network. That is a fundamental thing that is key with blockchain. Now, when you think about assets, assets transfer within a network, and there are two types of assets. We have tangible assets, such as your house or your car, and we have intangible assets, such as a piece of digital music or a financial instrument, such as a bond or intellectual property. And as you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, a cash is also an asset, which has an interesting property of anonymity, meaning that we do not know who owns it, meaning that if I had $50, I do not know where that $50 came from, or I do not know where that $50 who's going to own that $50 after me. The other concept that is really helpful in explaining blockchain is a ledger. Ledgers have been around since the 15th century, when Luca Pacioli, a Franciscan monk, published his work on double-entry bookkeeping. So in a business network, a ledger records the flow of an asset in and out of an organization. And when that happens, that ledger, when there's a transaction that occurs, the ledger is updated. So for example, if I'm going to pass an asset from myself to another member in a business network, that asset is updated on the ledger. And in updating that asset on the ledger, we have a transfer of goods from one person or from one member to the other member. The other thing is that we have contracts. And contracts are really conditions for a transaction to occur. And we have simple contracts and we have complicated contracts. Now, there's a problem with contracts and ledgers, and that is they're ambiguous. What do I mean by that? Ledgers are ambiguous because they require a reconciliation process. They require some dispute resolution to determine whether the transaction that I see is the same transaction as the one that you see. And then contracts are ambiguous because the parties or the members within the business network have to run a process to reconcile or have to run a process to actually implement what was agreed upon by the parties of the business network. And if that implementation, if that instantiation is not accurate, it's not what was agreed upon, then we have a problem. We then have to have lawyers come into play, we have judges who have to determine what is right, and that can be very costly. So how does blockchain help to resolve this? What blockchain does, it takes these two concepts of ledger and contract and brings them together so they can be shared. So then what is blockchain? Blockchain is a shared distributed ledger that facilitates the tracking of assets and recording of transactions in a business network. What do I mean? Shared ledger means that each member of the business network has a copy of that ledger. And ledger being distributed means that that ledger is on different nodes or different computers. And a ledger itself is really a system for recording business transactions. So you can think of a ledger as kind of a form of a database. So the one thing that I would like you to remember when you leave here is a ledger is simply system for recording a business transaction. Now, let's step back and look and see how organizations operate today. In today's environment, you have each member of a business network having their own type of ledger. And as you can see on this slide, there's a ledger besides each participant or member in this network. And what happens is you have assets that flow across the business network. So for example, if I want to exchange an asset or exchange something with, a product with a member of the business network, we have to make that exchange and the ledger is updated. And of course, in the ledger being updated, all ledgers within the network are updated for all the participants. And now, as I mentioned to you earlier, this system has been in place since the 15th century. And what we've been doing is incrementally digitizing this system over time. And the good thing that is, hey, it's tried and tested and it's in popular usage. But there are downsides to this system. And it's inefficient, it's expensive, and it's vulnerable. What do I mean? Inefficient. It means that every member in the business network has to run a form of a process to update their ledgers, meaning that they do this in a duplicative way. Everyone in the business network has to, update their own ledger. That's number one. Number two, it's expensive. If you think about audit, the audit function, audits are expensive, time-consuming, and require a lot of resources. And so for an organization to do an audit across an entire business network, both internal and external, that is an expensive and time-consuming event or activity. And then third is vulnerable. If you look at today's environment, there's either a threat of fraud, there's cybercrime, there's malicious modification of ledgers, or even there are mistakes that are made. And this happens so often, and it's hard to detect. And in this happening, you have loss of trust. Now imagine we layer blockchain on top of this. We layer or bring blockchain into the picture. All members of the business network share a common ledger. And this ledger is replicated through peer-to-peer technology across the business network. And we also use what we call privacy services to control who can see what, who has access to what information within the blockchain. And so, for example, if participant A exchanges something with participant B in the network, they have the full details or full access to the information of that transaction. But however, if the bank was not involved in that transaction, they do not have full details of that transaction. So when you think about blockchain, there are really certain things that come about from blockchain. Certain things that are really pertinent to really leveraging blockchain. And that is consensus, provenance, immutability, and finality. Consensus means that we have to agree that who within the business network is going to validate and endorse transactions within the network onto the blockchain. That's one. Provenance means we have an audit trail, meaning that we want to know, we have a complete history of who's owned that asset throughout its life cycle, and it's recorded on the blockchain. And then third is immutability, meaning that with immutability, once something is committed to the blockchain, it cannot be changed and it is permanent. So we use privacy services to really lock one block with the next block in the blockchain, and it's almost impossible to tamper with the blockchain once that's been committed. And then four is finality. And this is really a consequence or an accrual of the previous 3 points, meaning that once something is committed to the blockchain, we have one single record of truth. We have one single record of what is in the blockchain, and this increases trust. Now, a question people often ask is, what is the difference between blockchain or Bitcoin and blockchain? Or some people think that Bitcoin is blockchain. Well, Bitcoin is an unregulated shadow currency, and it has a property of anonymity, meaning that I do not know who I'm passing the Bitcoin to, and I do not know who I'm receiving a Bitcoin from. And also, Bitcoin requires a lot of resource-intensive computing power to really run that network. But one thing is that it was the first and biggest implementation of Bitcoin, of blockchain. And so it's a good reference point for blockchain. However, we are not interested, and when I say we, I mean IBM and businesses that we work in, are not interested in shadow currencies. We're interested in blockchain for business. And we differ from Bitcoin in 3 different areas. One is we prioritize identity over anonymity. What do I mean by that? That means that we want to make sure we know who we're dealing with within the network. We want to know who the other parties are. Who am I working with? That's one. The other thing is selective endorsement. We prioritize selective endorsement over proof of work. What that means is we want to select, and are interested in knowing who within the business network is going to endorse a transaction, which is much more computationally efficient than the resource-intensive proof of work that comes with Bitcoin. And then third is we're interested in a broad set of assets. We're interested in tangible assets and intangible assets. So we're not just interested in cryptocurrency. So when you ask, what are some of the requirements for blockchain for business? If you had to stand up blockchain for business, what would you be looking at? Well, these are the 4 items that you'd want to be interested in. And I've touched on some of them. So shared ledger. So this is an append-only distributed ledger that is available across the business network. And each member within the business network has a replicated copy of that ledger. And the ledger is permissioned. That's one. 2 is privacy. Privacy meaning that we select who within the business network can endorse or validate a particular transaction on the blockchain. And then third is trust. Trust meaning that, or trust is engendered as a result of knowing who's going to endorse that transaction and making sure that there's visibility into what's going on. And by doing that, we also have privacy service that have cryptography to really lock down the blockchain so that you don't have tampering. And then last is smart contracts. Smart contracts are really the business logic. They're really I'd call it the rules that govern the contracts. And this is what ensures that contracts are executed based on what's been agreed upon. Now let's dive into why is blockchain relevant for business. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share 2 use cases with you. But before that, let me share some of the benefits of blockchain. Now these benefits are real and they're very tangible. And as the first benefit says, blockchain, the blockchain saves time. So there are particular transactions that normally take days today to really run. And with blockchain, some of these transactions can actually happen almost instantaneously. So for example, if you went out and tried to get a line of credit, or you tried to get a pre-approval on a mortgage, those functions or activities today do take a couple of days to execute. But with blockchain, we can do this almost instantaneously, saving a lot of time. The other one is removing costs. And I gave you the example of an audit. Audits take a lot of time. But with blockchain, we can take out all the overhead. We can take out all the intermediaries that come into play to make this a more efficient and cost-effective system. And then reducing risk. Again, I mentioned before blockchain, you have a lot of tampering of ledgers, you have a lot of fraud, cyber attacks. But with blockchain, you can really lock down the system. You can really make sure that with the blockchain and cryptography, everything is in place, which of course reduces risk. And then last is increased trust. And this is really a net benefit. It's a net improvement of really knowing that everybody within the network is using the same system, they're using the same process, and actually using the same blockchain. Now let's touch on use cases. So this is a supply chain provenance use case, and it's a cross-industry use case. It can be applied to multiple industries and to multiple companies. So imagine with me for a moment. Think about an aircraft, and now think about the process of building an aircraft. Now think about the parts, all the complex parts and pieces that go into building an aircraft. Now imagine taking all those components, all those many complex pieces and parts, and putting them onto a blockchain, and being able to track them from where they come from all the way to them being on a final aircraft. Now these components are able to be recorded, they're able to be tracked, so we know exactly who the manufacturer was, who manufactured that piece. We know who was able to touch them all the way through assembly, all the way into the final aircraft. Now, the advantage here is, you have a full audit trail. You know exactly who's touched the different assets. You know exactly where they were location-wise, whether it was physical or geographical. You know who's, made changes. Even, for example, if there's computer code that you want to add, you want to track computer code that is used to build the aircraft or to improve the aircraft, that can be captured in the blockchain. So the benefits are really increased trust. And, if you have a recall, you're able to go back and determine, what subsystem failed. Instead of doing a complete fleet recall, bringing all the planes in, which inconveniences all of us, you can be able, through the blockchain, determine what component within which planes was failing and do that more readily and quicker. This use case, I've touched on it, but again, it's an audit and compliance use case. And audit and compliance is, providing an organization with a complete record of their ledger. And when you think about in large companies, you have an audit or compliance team that really goes around trying to consolidate information, from all the different departments for ledgers. So going through the different departments, and you got ledger information, and trying to consolidate that so you can give that to external auditors or to a regulator. And that is an arduous process. It's a lengthy process, and by the time that information is collected, it's probably out of date. Now with blockchain, we can automate this process. And in addition to that, we can help the organization have better visibility into their financial liquidity, so they have a better understanding of their financial position. And another thing that we can do in this process is we can also bring the auditor into the business network. So typically today, companies give auditors information. It's kind of a push to the auditor. But with blockchain, what you can do now is have the auditor be part of that business network. So by doing that, they can pull that information on demand and be able to evaluate the position or the situation of the company. So the benefits here are lowering costs and, of course, changing the nature of compliance from passive to active. This slide shows a number of, this is examples of blockchain use cases that we've seen with other industries. And, blockchain use cases are emerging across industries. And the use cases that we're seeing are bubbling up, and they're really live, real business use cases to solve business problems. And a question that often comes up in discussions from clients is, so what constitutes a good business use case? And it comes down to the 4 words I mentioned earlier: consensus, provenance, immutability, and finality. But the most important of all is having a business network. If you don't have other parties or members to work with, then blockchain's not a fit for that use case. And what we end up telling clients is probably a traditional database may be a better fit. Now let me share with you some examples of where blockchain has been implemented successfully. What you can see on this slide is where IBM has invested in blockchain. IBM has been investing, and we've collaborated with many clients to build networks. And in so doing, these organizations have actually, we've seen a scale up in their competitive advantage and really them being able to unlock new business value. And so what you're seeing is networks and companies that IBM has worked with to really build, build networks. And so I'm going to touch on 3 of these. I'm going to touch on TradeLens, and then I'm going to touch on food safety, which is Ibm Food Trust, and clearing and settlement, which is Worldwire. So TradeLens. TradeLens is a partnership. It's a collaborative agreement between IBM and Maersk. Maersk is the largest shipping and container company in the world. And really the goal with this network is to digitize the global supply chain by leveraging blockchain to share information in near real time and speed up shipments. So when you think about the shipping industry, there are many participants. There are many people who come into, work in that ecosystem. So you have customs, you have border control, you have the ocean liners, you have port authorities, you have the folks who forward, inland shipping. So you have a lot of people in this network trying to, get containers from point A to point B. And you can imagine a lot of it is digital, a lot of it is also manual. And what ends up happening, the administrative costs of just moving a container from point A to point B is more expensive than actually the goods inside a container. And so the objective here was really to drive down cost, to make sure that information is being shared, and to foster collaboration among the members of the network. The other one is Ibm Food Trust. And this network, it was created to provide traceability to improve food transparency and efficiency. So we're using blockchain here to, what I would say is create trust among all the members. So all the way from the grower or the farmer, all the way to the consumer or to your plate, making sure that everybody has an understanding as to what is in the food supply chain, where did products come from. And really the benefits for this was to reduce impacts on recalls. The other benefit was to provide end-to-end traceability and transparency, and make sure that, instill trust among the constituents of the network. And so an anecdote here is, as they were building this system, they wanted to test how effective this system was. And so they decided to figure out how long is it going to take for us to trace a package of sliced mangoes, all the way back to the farm. And the current process, it actually took, which was manual and digital, it took 6 hours, 18 minutes, and 26 seconds. And with blockchain and Ibm Food Trust, it took 2.2 seconds. WorldWire is a network where it's a network that IBM's involved with to help create a real-time clearing and settlements of global payments. So when you think about banks and financial institutions, being able to send money and settle payments in real time globally with finality. And so that's what this network's all about. Because if you think about sending payments and clearing, you have a lot of intermediaries, a lot of overhead. And so this process took a long time. But with blockchain, we're able to provide visibility. We're able to make sure that this is done in 24/7, and we're actually providing a secure network. Now, how can IBM help? So IBM is involved in these 3 swim lanes or slices. And so from a technology standpoint, IBM is part of what we call the Linux Foundation. And we are founding members of the Hyperledger project. And what IBM did is we donated our code to the Hyperledger project. And the reason we decided to do that is we thought this was the best way of growing blockchain for business. And we use Hyperledger Fabric, which is the framework that we use to build and implement blockchain. Besides being a member and a contributor to the Hyperledger Fabric, IBM also provides hosting and support services. That means that if you're an organization who's interested in standing up blockchain, we provide the infrastructure services for you to do that. So for example, if you want to productionize a blockchain, you want to really get up and running, and we want to have security and high performance, we have the High Security Business Network. If you're a company that wants to just stand up blockchain or really experiment, we have the IBM Cloud. Or if you want to kind of do a roll your own, and we have containers, blockchain containers that can run on Docker. And then making blockchain real for clients. This is our engagement model. This is how we work with clients in terms of providing best practices, garage services, methodologies. And really what we're trying to do here is really help customers, figure out what use cases make sense for them and what parts of their business will see improvement and benefit from blockchain. Now, the Hyperledger project. The Hyperledger project is a collaborative agreement, or at least a collaboration between multiple companies from multiple industries. And it is the fastest growing Linux Foundation project and has over 260 members, and you can see some of the members on this slide. As I mentioned, IBM is a contributing, or at least a founding member, and we still contribute. But the key differentiation, or at least what is key for us, is the Hyperledger project. In this project, there's no one controlling organization, no one controlling entity that governs this project. This is done by all the members. So there's no vendor lock-in. There's no one company that's going to steer direction. It's all members providing direction. So which enables, you don't have proprietary technology. You have technology that can be leveraged in different areas. And so we subscribe to open standards, and it's an open source project, or at least open source technology. So at IBM, what we try and do is, bring together our expertise, our solutions, our technology, and really an ecosystem to help clients innovate and really transform their industries. And with IBM, if you're engaging with us from a blockchain standpoint, we have over 500 plus blockchain engagements that we've participated in. And so, working with us, you have that, you have an active network available. You have folks who've been able to do this over time. The other thing is, Juniper Research and Winter, I believe it's Winterfresh Research, said that IBM is the #1 blockchain vendor in the world, and we own 32% of the market. Last, if you're interested in blockchain and you want to take a test drive, there are various ways to engage with IBM. These are actually links, so if you want to, test out blockchain, what it's all about, you want to schedule a workshop, or you want to develop your own app, or even activate your own network, you can definitely leverage these links to get to more information. So thank you for your attention, and appreciate it.